Morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. I want to start with the prayer for opening our eyes to the wonders of Torah. Galeinai ve'abita niflaot mitoratecha. Galeinai ve'abita niflaot mitoratecha. Galeinai ve'abita niflaot mitoratecha. This week's parsha is Chukat, which means decree or ordinance. What strikes me most from delving into the mysteries of the Torah is the extraordinary sensitivity to and the deep respect for the details of life. The opening line of Chukat tells us that the ritual of the red heifer is the decree of the Torah, which can mean A, that the Torah is telling us to perform the mitzvah of the red heifer, or B, that the lesson of the red heifer sacrifice sums up the entire Torah. I will explain why I side with the latter. There are three types of mitzvot. One that anyone who is a decent human being would think up and follow, like don't murder, don't steal. And then there are mitzvot that are informed by the stories or verses in the Torah, like the laws of Shabbat. And then there are chukat, laws that defy logic and demand our absolute faith in God's all-knowingness. Shatnez, the prohibition of wearing wool and linen. Kashrut, and the ritual of the red heifer are examples of chukat, a law for which no logical reason can be given. This is the will of God, as in I will do and I will understand, or maybe I won't understand, but I'll do it anyway because I have total faith in God. The Parsha is an example that the Holy One creates the remedy before the disease. I don't know the source for this, but I've read this in many of the commentaries, and I want to give credit in particular to Chabad.org. There's just so much there, and it leads me on wonderful paths of inquiry. This confusing, dense law demands our attention, just as many aspects of this parsha that don't seem to make sense at first glance. A way to explain the difference between intellect and will is in the case of couples. Your daughter introduces you to a guy she's gaga for, and you see he's a total no-goodnik. You reason with her logically, and she says, but I love him. I must be with him. It defies logic, but logic does not penetrate will. So here, God is giving us a strange mitzvah to do, one that is barely doable anyway, since in all of history, there have only been 9 red heifers with no more than 2 black hairs. This red heifer must be sacrificed in a special way in order to make tahor one who is tameh. The state of tameh has to do with coming into contact with death. Tahor returns one from that state. Death is the antithesis of holiness, since God is the source of life and vitality. We hear this in the morning prayer. God, the soul you gave to me is pure. You breathed it in me, you shaped it, and one day you will take it from me. Today, when we go to a cemetery, God forbid, we enter a state of tameh, which is why we do a special hand washing ritual at the cemetery before we enter the Shiva home. The Midrash Tanchuma says on 19:2, a mate's child once dirtied the royal palace. Said the king, let his mother come and clean up her child's filth. By the same token, God says, let the red heifer atone for the deed of the golden calf. The priests who made the red heifer into ashes for the sake of purifying others became tameh themselves. To help another Jew at your own expense is the decree of the Torah. Self-sacrifice, like being a member of the Chevra Kadisha. Doing a mitzvah on behalf of the dead is very special because the dead can't thank you. And by doing the mitzvah of purifying the dead, you yourself become tamei. In a broader context, there are times when we just need to get into the mud with someone. It requires a degree of self-sacrifice that might result in exhaustion or some level of depletion of our inner resources. And knowing this, we do it anyway, because that's what it is to be part of humanity. The next section of this parsha tells of Miriam the prophetess's death and the lack of water, which gets Moses so angry that instead of speaking to the rock, he hits it. He is then told he will not enter the promised land. Many readers often decry God's overreaction to the seemingly minor offense. After all, in an earlier parsha, Shemot 17, verses 1 through 7, God instructs Moses to hit the rock for water to come out. The common thread in all of these stories is mortality and living waters. Moses lost it because he had just lost Miriam. And not only was she his sister, he owed his very existence to her. If it wasn't for Miriam insisting that her parents stay together, Moses wouldn't have been born. She knew that the liberator of the Hebrew slaves would be born through her parents. Then she saved him from certain death by putting him in the water. She convinced Pharaoh's daughter to hire Moses's biological mother to nurse him, more living waters of the kind. The fact that there was no water after Miriam died shows that the waters followed her in her merit. Another connection with Miriam and the ritual of the red heifer is that in an earlier parsha, she was tamei due to her skin affliction of tzara'at. At that time, the community waited for her while she was isolated and then brought back to a state of tahor through going into a mikvah, living waters. Putting the red heifer's ashes in the living waters is the antidote to death. Other religions focus on life after death. Judaism's main focus is to find God in this life within the living waters. The ritual of the red heifer is replete with red, the symbol of life. The heifer must be red, mixed with red hyssop, red cedar wood, and red wool. In the laws of the Lashon Hara, one must not embarrass a person lest the red color leave their face. When Miriam is stricken with tzara'at, her skin is white as snow, as a baby stillborn. That's in Numbers 12, verses 10 and 12. What remains to be explained is why Moses and Aaron are told that they will not enter the promised land. When Moses hit the rock to get the much needed water, he lost more than his temper. One must not grieve excessively because the confusion following grief can cause a loss of faith in God. There's so much tragedy in the world that tests our faith in God, and if we focus on it too much, we can lose our faith in the will of God. There are many things in life that seem completely unfair. Our faith is tested daily. A great prophet like Moses, the leader of these newly freed slaves, could not afford to lose his faith in God, since it was his faith that propelled him to lead his people. The Izbitcher Rebbe wrote that becoming angry at God is like touching a corpse. You're trying to get involved in something that's happened already. It's dead. Don't harbor any complaints of anger in your heart about something that's already taken place in this world. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks wrote of Chukat, life after life and the resurrection of the dead are fundamental, non-negotiable principles of Jewish faith, but Tanakh is conspicuously quiet about them. It is focused on finding God in this life, on this planet, notwithstanding our mortality. The dead do not praise God, says the psalm. God is to be found in life itself, with all its hazards and dangers, bereavements and grief. We may be no more than dust and ashes, as Abraham says, but life itself is a never-ending stream, living water, and it is this rite of the red heifer symbolizes. With great subtlety, the Torah mixes law and narrative together, the law before the narrative, because God provides the cure before the disease. Miriam dies. Moses and Aaron are overwhelmed with grief. Moses, for a moment, loses control, and he and Aaron are reminded that they too are mortal and will die before entering the land. Yet this is, as Maimonides said, the way of the world. We are embodied souls. We are flesh and blood. We grow old. We lose those we love. Outwardly, we struggle to maintain our composure, but inwardly we weep. Yet life goes on, and what we began, others will continue. Those we loved and lost live on in us, as we will live on in those we love. For love is as strong as death, and the good we do never dies. And I'd like to finish with a little line from Hallel. Ze hayom asa Adonai nagila v'nismechavo. This is the day that God has made. Let us be glad and rejoice in it. Deep party. Thank you.